Today we're going to be talking about the topic, what is a firewall and why does it matter? We find out that that's a pretty important question to ask because everybody has been to Walmart and seen cheap firewalls for sale. So the question you naturally ask is, why should I spend a lot of money to buy a firewall if I can just go to Walmart and buy a cheap one? And that's a fair question to ask. Nobody, myself included, likes to spend more money on IT than they have to. So this morning, we're going to ask that question about what exactly does a firewall do and why does it matter what I purchase for the firewall that I use for my business? Like I mentioned earlier, one of the first things that many people want to do when we talk about buying a firewall is to ask the question, why not just go out to Walmart, Best Buy, someplace else, and pick up a cheap home consumer level firewall? After all, they sell them by the tons. They're dirt cheap out there. And won't that do as good for me as something that costs much more money? Well, it's a fair question to ask because when we talk about a firewall, we're talking about something that definitely is going to be lower cost if we go buy it at Walmart. It's going to be something that is going to be immediately available. All I have to do is pick it up, carry it off the shelf, and go home and install it. It's going to be simpler to use. After all, it doesn't have all those bells and whistles that something more expensive might have. And so the question legitimately that can be asked is, that will do the job, won't it? After all, if I can spend $200-300 and get it done and have everything I need, why not do that? Well, that is indeed a fair question. So perhaps the best way to answer that is to back off and just ask, what in the world is a firewall and what does a firewall accomplish for me? That graphic that you've got on the screen kind of encapsulates what a firewall does. It's designed to be a block between all the stuff that's going on out in the World Wide Web and you as the user. And by being that block, that stop, it's designed to stop so much of the bad stuff that's going on from getting into your network and actually doing anything bad. So you might think of the firewall as really being the first line of defense between your network and all the bad stuff on the internet. When you think of your office and think about your connection to the internet and you get your firewall between your office network and the connection, all the traffic that goes in and out of your network, including all attempts at bad traffic or all attempts for malware or intrusion, everything has to go through that firewall first. So you might think of it as being like a guard that's at the door of your network or a guard that's at the door of your business. If you buy a cheap firewall, it's kind of like getting a guard that doesn't have much experience or much ability. And if you look at something that has more capability, it's going to be like getting a higher end guard for your business. Most common firewall types that you have, there's several different ways, and this is also confusing because you have the term firewall used in a number of different locations. First off, the firewalls that we're talking about just now would be what we think of as that network box, that appliance, that piece of equipment that plugs in between your network and the internet. You might see them by D-Link or SonicWall or Cisco or Fortinet or any number of manufacturers make these, but they're generally going to be a standalone appliance, a standalone piece of hardware that you plug in and controls the traffic going back and forth. But then in addition, if you've run Windows, you've seen the Windows firewall, or if you've run some version of Linux, you've seen some other kind of firewall there. And those operate at the operating system level. So if I've got my Windows 11 machine and I've got my Windows firewall active, that Windows firewall is controlling traffic in and out of my Windows 11 machine, but it doesn't really affect anything else that's going on across the rest of the network. It's not going to be sitting there managing the connection to the internet. It's not going to be controlling traffic that goes maybe to somebody else's machine. It's just going to monitor traffic in and out of my own computer. It's important. It's another step in a layered defense, but it's not the same as the network appliance. Sometimes you'll find an antivirus package that has a firewall included with it of some kind. These most often will function similar to the Windows firewall that we just talked about. They generally won't run in addition to the Windows firewall. It's usually one or the other, but they do something similar to what the Windows firewall do. Good stuff, do a good job, but they don't cover the entire network. Then if you've got a website that you're running, you probably have on your website, either running on the server or before the server or someplace, you've got something called a web application firewall. There's several different kinds, several different versions of these. If you're running a website, or maybe your business website is done with WordPress, you might be using a web application firewall named WordFence to control that. And these web application firewalls are even different than the network appliance. For the web application firewall, is going to be specially tuned to handle and prevent attacks from people going after web applications. You and I have all seen in the news how that many times there are bad guys that are going after your websites, trying to get information or trying to get data, 1,001 different things trying to, or trying to just take it over and compromise it. None of us want that. None of us have the time to sit there all day and monitor it personally. So the web application firewall does a very important job of helping to keep your websites safe. Like I mentioned, if you're running WordPress, one of the most common web application firewalls is a product called WordFence, and it is absolutely just outstanding, as we talked about. So the point is that while there are a number of different types of firewalls that we could reference, and when we use that term, it can be used in all of these different ways. For our purposes today, our focus is going to be on the network appliance that is sitting at the edge of your network between you and the rest of the world. And as that network appliance sits there at the edge of the network, that entire data stream that comes in and out between your network and the web is going to be inspected by that firewall to see if there's bad stuff in it or things that should be blocked or changed. That data that comes in and out between your network and the World Wide Web goes in units of ones and zeros, referred to as a packet. Now, a little bit of background so we can understand better what a firewall does. You can almost think about a packet as being like an envelope. And inside that envelope, you've got a certain number of ones and zeros that are all prepared to do something on the network. Well, when you receive mail at your house, you don't know what is in that mail until you look at it. Likewise, when you've got packets that go across your network from the internet to your network, your firewall doesn't know what's in those packets until it begins doing certain things. And there's basically 4 things that a firewall can do with a packet, very similar to the 4 things you can do with an envelope. The first thing that a firewall can do with a packet is if it determines that packet is from a bad source, or it's got bad stuff in there, or it's part of an intrusion attempt, it can sit there and it can block the packet. It stops it right there at the firewall. The packet never gets into your network at all. It's blocked there at the edge. And so whatever that packet was trying to do never gets accomplished. Great thing for a firewall to do. Second thing a firewall can do is that it may be able to direct a packet. So for example, if you've got a website that you're hosting on your particular network and you've got a public IP address for it, when somebody in the outside world tries to come to your website, those packets come to the firewall, and the firewall may redirect those packets to your particular web server. A firewall can do that as well as shifting and moving packets in other directions. So first 2 things the firewall can do with a packet is that it can block it and it can direct it. Third thing is probably what we think about as one of the most important things, is that a firewall can inspect it. That is much like opening up an envelope, looking at the things that are inside that envelope and deciding whether or not it was good or bad or what you want to do with it. Likewise, a firewall can take a packet of data that's coming across the internet. It can open up that packet of data and look at what's inside. So as it looks at the stuff that's inside, it makes a determination if that is good stuff or bad stuff or just how it should be handled. And then the fourth basic thing that a firewall can do with a packet is that it can change the packet. For example, you may have some data coming in from the outside world, and it maybe is trying to go to a mail server running on port 25, but you've set your mail server up to run on port 2525. It may change parts of the port number on it to go to someplace else, or maybe you've got an address change that needs to go, or maybe you've got there's 1,001 things. So a firewall can change the data inside the packet a little bit if need be. So once you look at a firewall and see that there's four basic things that it can do to a packet, you realize that that inexpensive firewall that you're looking at Walmart or Best Buy, for example, has really limited capabilities in all four of these areas. For example, it may get packets that come in, but it's not aware of some of the newer trends, or maybe it doesn't even look to block stuff. There may be attempts by something inside your network to call outside as being part of a botnet. An expensive firewall might not even know what to do about that and how it could possibly stop that. And so consequently, what we always recommend to our clients is that we go with if they're more expensive, that we go with a higher end kind of a firewall referred to as a next generation firewall, NGNF. And generally, when we talk about a next generation firewall, what we're talking about is something that has expanded capabilities built into it to protect your network, in addition to real-time capabilities to keep up with the next threats that are coming out all across the internet. So not only does it have a list of stuff built into it, but as time progresses and new threats are determined, the manufacturer of that firewall is able to update your next generation firewall with certain specs, certain rule sets, certain understandings so that it knows what these expanded threats are and is able to block those also. A sample list of some of the things that a next generation firewall can do that many times an inexpensive firewall cannot do. And by the way, this is not a complete list. There are additional items beyond this. For example, a next generation firewall can go beyond the basics of those four things and has additional ability to block, direct, inspect, and change packets. I know that's kind of nerdy, but that's pretty important on them. Next generation firewall can do connection inspection. We don't often realize this, but when we get our computers or our devices up on the internet, they connect to all sorts of things out around the world. And if you've got malware on your computer may be connecting to the home base for the malware or for the ransomware gang or whoever. So a next generation firewall knows what some of these bad connections would be and can inspect them, and in many cases block them or stop them. Next generation firewall also allows you to do content filtering. Now there's lots of different variations on this. The most basic variation of this would be that it allows you to block websites that you don't want your people in your business to be going to. Say you want to disable social media access during business hours. Content filtering would do that. But it will also go beyond that to obviously block pornography sites. But you may also want to use it to inspect like emails or files that go in and out as one way to help prevent your proprietary information from being leaked and getting out to other people. We mentioned briefly earlier botnet detection. Basically, a botnet is when someone on the internet takes over a whole bunch of different devices and then uses all those different devices to do something together. Most of the famous botnets that you've heard of will encompass 10, 20,000 devices. And so you might have 10 or 20,000 devices that are all set to attack a competitor's website at the same time in what's called a denial of service attack. If you've got You may not have the whole botnet in your office, but it may be that you've got a camera that was compromised and became part of the botnet, like the Mirai botnet did. And so botnet detection lets your firewall understand if you've got something that is compromised and block it and stop that camera or whatever you've got from being part of this botnet to attack other people. Next generation firewall can also do geo-limiting, and I understand that this has its limits when you talk about. But let's say that you don't do any business at all in half of Africa. You may choose to take those countries in Africa and limit them from being able to access your stuff. Or you find that you're being attacked constantly from one particular country, and so you want to stop those attacks from that area. One way to do this is to build in geo-limiting to turn off those countries' ability to access your network and get to your stuff. A next generation firewall can also do extended logging and alerting. Now, if you're under some kind of compliance requirements, HIPAA, for example, you've got needs for certain logging. If you're under some kind of auditing stuff, you may need some kind of alerting when certain events happen. And so these two abilities, logging and alerting, besides letting you understand what is going on within your network and alerting you to things that are going on that may need attention from you, logging and alerting can also be important components of compliance programs and regulatory requirements. So that's a good thing to do. Connection control, similar to connection inspection that we talked about earlier, where the next generation firewall has the ability to monitor all the connections in and out of your office so it can manage and control any that should be shut down, as well as application control. Maybe you've got certain applications that you don't want anyone in your office to run and to use to access the World Wide Web. Application control can be one tool to use to help that. Malware interception is probably the most common thing we think about. We're all thinking about viruses that come in and get in, or some kind of remote control Trojan or something like that. A next generation firewall can intercept these, unless you think that, well, everything's been written. There are literally tens of thousands of new variants of malware detected every single day. We can't keep up with these. Your next generation firewall, because of the subscription service with the manufacturer, is able to do this. And the final note that we had here about what a next generation firewall can do is that it can help with both intrusion detection as well as intrusion prevention. Intrusion detection, something got in, say somebody brought into your office a flash drive, stuck that thumb drive into the computer, and that thumb drive had malware, and it tries to get out and call home to wherever its control center is. A next generation firewall can help detect when an intrusion has occurred. It's not the only tool we use. It's not the only one that can do that, but it can be part of that. Likewise, it can help prevent intrusions by filtering those packets as they come through, recognize when something is bad, and preventing it from going ahead and going in. With all of this going on, it's pretty easy to see that a next generation firewall is important. It's worth the time to help give you protection in today's world. But the downside is that it does cost money. So question is, how much money? How much money it costs is going to depend on what size your firewall needs to be in order to handle your traffic for your network. So a small network of half a dozen people in an office won't need as big a firewall as a large network with 100 people or 500 people in the office. Any way you look at, they will need updated signature data, and signatures, what they call the data that's fed into the firewall so it knows what to block. That subscription will cost money. And once again, that subscription will cost more for a larger office than it will for a small office. So exactly how much it costs, that's the question, more a function of what the size is of your office that you're dealing with. But from our experience, a next generation firewall is easily worth the money, simply because of what it can do and the protections that it provides. The next thing, though, to mention about this is that if you are one of those companies that has expanded your security architecture, say you're building in a SIEM, you're doing some kind of logging, you're doing intrusion analysis, all those different things, a good next generation firewall will also integrate with your security architecture. So however you've got your flow of data set up in your business, you'll be able to, your flow of data set up in your business to handle security events. You'll be able to integrate this next generation firewall with it so you get full value out of it and are able to help stop things before they happen and are bad. Well, if a next generation firewall is a good thing to have, and I believe thoroughly it is, and if a next generation firewall is going to be something that I should be looking for, what exactly do I look for when I'm thinking about a next generation firewall? Well, a few things. We mentioned earlier about how the cost is related to the size. And so it's important that as we talk about the next generation firewall, that we set down and appropriately size it, as how we size it will affect the lifetime cost. We want something sized appropriately to handle our maximum internet capacity. We want something sized appropriately to handle the number of connections we're looking at having within our office. If I've got Wi-Fi running in the office and I expect to host events that may draw 500 people, we're going to have a different size firewall than we would for a company with only half a dozen people in the office all the time. So in a sense, we're going to size it based upon our maximum capacities and utilizations on that. We're also going to have to look in our next generation firewall at capabilities. I gave you a list of some of the most common capabilities a little bit earlier, and we walked down and talked about what those were. But that was not a complete list, and there are some manufacturers that have certain capabilities that only their firewall supports. So as you're looking for a next generation firewall, besides thinking about the size and the lifetime cost, if you have special capabilities, generally they're all going to have the same common, much of it's going to be common, but if you've got some really, really special, unique case, then you may want to look at something that supports that really, really special, unique capability. In all our years doing this, honestly, we've not run across anybody where we had to do that, but that's something to think about. Then, because we talked about size and talked about how that affects lifetime cost, looking at your next generation firewall, you're then going to have to think about the annual support and subscription cost. This is going to cost you several hundred to couple thousand dollars a year, depending on how you buy it. And generally, if you buy for multiple years at once, the cost per year comes down. If you just buy a year at a time, that's going to be the more expensive piece. If you buy multiple years at a time, the cost per year comes down. So looking at the annual support and subscription cost is important. And as part of that, understanding that that firewall is going to have a certain lifetime. I mentioned earlier that we deal a lot with sonic walls, that they're our primary vendor that we use. And the sonic walls have been great devices, done great stuff. They have moved over from the Generation 6 boxes that are all reaching end of life over to Generation 7. And so as part of your costs of your firewalls, as you look at it, realize that as the needs of your network increase, as the bad traffic on the internet gets more and more complex, you may have to upgrade your firewall to the next generation of things simply to support the next generation of malware and of bad stuff that's coming out. I would strongly recommend that if you're buying a next generation firewall, that you look for an IT provider who can give local support. That's somebody that can walk in, that can actually look at it. We find that a lot of times people like to actually look someone in the eye and talk to them about a problem that they have. This is generally not going to be someone that if you got a small office, someone is going to be able to handle and manage on a part-time basis. They do get pretty complex. But it's nice if you've got some kind of local support to come in, help set it up, monitor it, whatever you work out with them as you deal with buying this device. Then the last thing I would look for is I look for a next generation firewall, is I would look for how that firewall will integrate into my security architecture. Now, by security architecture, we're talking about not only all the stuff that protects you, but then the stuff that you've got set up so that you can troubleshoot when things happen, or maybe come back in the future and track down an intrusion. Look at how that particular firewall will integrate with what you've got and ask the question, does that do what I need for it to do? So overall, when we talk about next generation firewalls, number one, we are sold on them. They are definitely worth the time and worth the issues. And I would encourage you, if you have never looked at that or consider upgrading your firewalls, to do that right now. If you have any questions, feel free to drop us a note. Our email is there on the screen, as well as our phone number, contact information. There is a summary handout available. If you go to our website, www.custominternet.biz, you'll see a banner across that website that leads you to the practical cybersecurity webinars, and there will be a handout that accompanies this. And the webinar is available for replay on YouTube. So feel free to take advantage of any of these avenues and contact us if we can help you out. We deal with clients all over, not just in our local area. So we would love to help you out if there's a situation where we can assist. All right. Well, that's about it for now. I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Thank you very much for attending this webinar, and hope you come to the next one we've got coming up in just a few short weeks. All right. Thank you. Goodbye.